and welcome to another Bangers and Classics podcast with me, James Ruppert, who sort of hesitates a lot, has knee-jerk opinions and does very little research, and him, David Milloy, who's very thorough, very precise, and will provide all the information that you need. So let's find what he's been up to for the last week or so. Hello, David.
Hello, James. I think a more accurate description of me would be pillock. This is, in fact, the 10th Bangers and Classic podcast. We've survived that long, in spite of the attempts of possibly the RAF or the USAF to bomb you, and the brickbats that have been hurled at us, usually by people that I know. But there we go. So this is number 10. So I want to kick it off with a correction. Another one, I haven't done one of these for a few weeks. I said last week that Mick Jagger was involved in financing a film called Free Jack. Now, Mick's not that daft with his money, let's be honest. He didn't actually finance Free Jack. He did, however, produce a film called Enigma, and I believe even supplied a 4-rotor Enigma machine for the producers to use in the film. The second thing is, this is a plug. So obviously we're going to get a klaxon. That's on order just now, the Bangers and Classic klaxon. My new book with an illustrator called Russell Wallace, who's done a superb job, is almost finished. All I'll say just now is it's called Lesser Spotted Classics, and it should be available in the next 3 to 4 weeks. We're just doing the snagging just now. So what have you been up to, James?
Well, actually, it's been quite strange, really, because we've been having cars breaking down, and none of them are bangers or classics, which is quite surprising. The thing about modern cars is that they just sort of fail. I mean, old cars like what we drive are, they give you plenty of warning. They will moan for some time, or they'll do something strange, or the suspension will be, tipped to one side or forward.
Sounds like my wife.
Absolutely. There you go. That's a terrible thing to say. But modern cars, they just either work or they don't, it seems. And one car I'm sort of responsible for, although it doesn't actually live here anymore, is my daughter's Golf. And it's a 2015 Golf. And actually, it's been a superb car. It's been one of the best cars sort of ever.
It's not called Alice, is it?
No, it's not. People familiar with those old tunes. Essentially, what happened to it is because I saw phone footage of the dashboard where obviously it looks like there's a pinball machine occurring, is that the battery went. So unfortunately got stuck in traffic. There was a good Samaritan who did provide a jump start, but even after restarting and switching off the stop start, because again, that's something you have to do with modern cars, it did actually conk out again, and then had to be sort of rescued to a garage where they said, yeah, it's a battery. So, but batteries are so expensive, aren't they, on modern cars, because they have to do so much. So that's 180 quid.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, blimey.
Oh, blimey. Yeah, absolutely. You think, oh no, a battery's about 40. Well, last time I bought a battery for the Land Rover, it was about 60 quid. I thought, well, that's okay. But yeah, £180, amazing amount of money. But there you go. So there's been broken down cars, been journeys, there's been rescues, there's been all sorts of, so it's been car fun and games at this end. But as I say, none of it a banger or a classic. So what we're telling people is to own and run and enjoy bangers and classics, because they are without doubt the most reliable cars that you can own.
Absolutely. And if they break it down, well, you've got a sporting chance of being able to fix it yourself, and you won't have to shell out 180 quid for a battery.
No, certainly not.
That reminds me of a story about a battery. It does involve a classic. Yeah. And it was a trip to France with some friends in 2002 in what was then a 25-year-old Matra Rancho. And suffice it to say, there were various misadventures. I think a couple of engine mounts broke. We got to Dover to get the overnight, it was a late night sailing. We were sitting near lorries. I think it was mostly a commercial ferry we got, Norfolk Line, as I recall it. And it's this terrible smell. We're talking about the smell, saying, this is really disgusting. These lorries should be off the roads. That's disgusting. Got to France. We're driving along. Smell returns. And we looked at each other. It's a battery. And of course, we were cooking the battery. So the only way to save the situation, it was an older car, we had to pull out the voltage regulator every 100 miles. Drive 100 miles without the voltage regulator on, plug it back in, and then obviously we went to get a spare battery. That's another story in itself about the place we went to, where we'd ordered parts and the owner had sloped off on holiday without telling us. But yeah, it wasn't 180 quid though. It was about 40 quid. And it made life an awful lot easier. Even though we did have a problem, the car kind of let us know about it by deciding to cook the battery and exercised our olfactory glands, whatever that means.
Fantastic, but I'm glad that there was a happy ending to that story. It didn't end badly.
Oh well, it's a long story. That's one of the reasons why I'll probably never go back to Le Mans, but I'm not going to go into that here. So James, we're talking about modern cars. We should probably move over to something a bit older, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yes. And how about we do this week's banger classic early in the cast?
Yeah, get it over and done with.
Let's get it over and done with. Well, I was out driving yesterday, taking advantage of my newfound freedoms, and I saw a couple of classics. So one was very nice, blue TVRS. Couldn't tell you if it was a V8 or the V6 version, just a glimpse of it. The other one I saw was a very nice condition, I have to say, Triumph TR7 fixed head coupe. And I jokingly said that there was a guy running along behind it to pick up the pieces that fell off. That's why it's called a collector's car. You know, you got to stop and collect the bits that have fallen off. However, be that as it may, do we think the TR7 is a banger or a classic?
I think it is a car of its time, and I think it went through an extremely long period of being a banger and being ignored and being ridiculed for its shape, probably rather unfairly. But I think it's probably because of its sheer age and persistence. I think it's earned its rights to be a classic, because again, they don't make cars that shape anymore, which is a shame. The wedge is a marvelous and very effective. I mean, it cuts through the air, that wedge shape. But I think it was probably the reverse sort of rear pillar which didn't endear it to people. But it was the car that Purdy drove in the New Avengers, and I know that underneath it was sort of fairly Dolomite-ish, but I would say, just on the mere grounds that I suppose all the ones that have rusted away and been thrown away, there are probably few survivors now. I mean, I haven't checked, but I would say that was quite a rare spot. I can't remember the last time that I saw one out my way. So I would say it had definitely crossed from banger to classic, but you may disagree.
We'll come back to that in a second or two. We'll prolong the agony for Calvin a bit longer. He doesn't know which way I'm going to go with this one.
Right.
Yeah, the TR7, you talk about the styling, obviously that's the fixed head version. There's a story, and I can't remember the name of the designer, who saw it at a motor show, walked around the car and apparently shouted, "Oh my God, they've done it to the other side as well."
Yeah, I have heard that. Yeah, it was an Italian, and I can't remember who it was.
Yeah, it looks...
Micheletti, because of his association with Triumph. Yeah.
It could have been him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't particularly rate Michelotti styling, I have to say. I mean, the two greatest designers to me are Giugiaro and Gandini, and whichever order you want to put them in, that's absolutely fine, because to me they're both excellent. But however, the TR7 wasn't designed by any of those people, and sadly it shows. Now, I think it's grown into its looks over the years. The fixed head always looked a bit awkward. Did have pop-up lights, mind you, and the TR7 drop head, the convertible, actually I think I've always thought was quite a nice looking car. Some people disagree. I have to say, I can see why Triumph back in the day wanted to move away from the TR5, TR6 looks, because they were dated and they were trying to do something fresh and modern. I don't think they quite pulled it off with the fixed head, but as I say, I suppose at least they were trying to do something different. It's not a bad car to drive, the TR7. It's perhaps a little bit lacking in power in standard form. The V8 powered car had plenty of torque, but again, was quite short of power, really. It was about 135 horsepower in some versions, 150 in others, which isn't an awful lot, really, when you think about it. But they are interesting cars. They're quite comfortable cars. They're not bad to look at, and I see the drop head is very attractive to look at. So for that reason, I'm actually going to go classic. I'd like to say banger just to wind up Calvin, who's on Twitter, but no, I have to say, hand in heart, it's a classic.
Well done. We agree on something.
Well, we usually do, but that's only because I'm scared of you. Right, and on that particular bombshell, let's take a short break. The motorist has been under attack in recent years, but there's nothing new about this. And if you want to get the lowdown on the history of the war against the motorist, and indeed what may happen in the future, then check out James Ruppert's book, Demotorised. You can find it on James's website, which is www.bangonomics.com/books, or you can order a copy directly from Amazon. So welcome back. I'm going to start this segment of the podcast by going back to last week's, where we spoke about a film called The Speed Merchants. And in that film, one of the drivers featured was Vic Elford, who was a very gifted and very successful racing and rally driver back in the 60s and 70s. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Elford has taken poorly. He's a good age now. I couldn't tell you his exact age, but I think he's in his 80s, and he has prostate cancer, which he's had before and it's now returned. And also, I believe that he suffered from a broken leg and his mobility issues. And as he lives in America, you can imagine that, care will be expensive. There's now a fundraiser for him that's on GoFundMe. I don't have the address to hand, but if you go to GoFundMe and look for Vic Elford, that's ELFORD, then you can find out more about the campaign. And if you're so minded, and I certainly am, donate a few quid to it to help someone who certainly gave a lot to motorsport back in the day. One thing I would ask you to bear in mind in relation to Vic Elford and indeed other sports people of that era is that the massive financial rewards that are now on offer simply didn't exist in those days. Drivers were not rich people. They did not make massive fortunes as a rule out of motorsport. A very lucky few did. For the most, they made a reasonable living, and that's about as high as I can put it. So if you can bung a few quid to help out Vic Elford, then I'm sure it would be most warmly received. James, you, until a few days ago, ran a free magazine called Free Car Magazine. I believe that's no longer in existence. Am I right?
Well, Well, yeah, absolutely. It does sort of exist. The website is still there. We'll still upload stories to it and things like that. And many people would say, well, that's what you just should have done in the first place, really, because if you talk to younger people, and when I was setting it up, they sort of said, "What do you want to do a magazine for? You just start a website." So it will still exist. It'll still post stories and stuff like that, but the actual effort that I have to go to sort of chisel it all together and then hammer it into shape and all of that stuff is now over, which is a great shame. It did start as a real magazine that was handed out at train stations and was free at various places. It was you could even pick it up when you drove onto ferries and things like that. That's how widespread it was for a bit. But the events of last year sort of brought any income down to naught, and so the last year I've just been running it and seeing if I can sort of finance and get someone else interested in it, and they haven't. And I'm so old now, David, that if I waste time doing something that I can't see any return on, unless it's a book or unless it's doing a podcast with you. But I know that, I mean, the amount of income we get from this podcast is just remarkable.
Oh God, yeah,
it is, isn't it? So I just thought, I'll stop the magazine. But it was fun to do. It was I tried to be very different. It really wasn't about going round corners sideways. It wasn't about scoops. It was a magazine aimed at everybody, because most people aren't. I mean, this may come as some sort of shock to people, but actually, a lot of people couldn't care less about cars. They couldn't care less about bangers or classics. So it was aimed at the ordinary person who thought, oh yeah, that's quite interesting, because again, most people are motorists, and one day politicians might rue the day that most people are motorists when they push them too far, and I hope that happens. So in a way, that was the point of Free Car Mag. It was to make it accessible. Always put a person on the cover. A lot of the time, it was a celebrity, but I just thought, again, if you look at modern car magazines, they all look the same, and if you look at them from week to week or month to month, it's very difficult to tell the difference between them. Car magazine covers used to be very, very special things, which I rather loved, and I'm sure you did as well, David.
Yes, absolutely.
They were interesting to look at, and so it sort of leads me to think about other car magazines which are no longer with us, but had a great sort of effect on us. So, what magazines did you like, David, back in the day?
Oh, back in the day, well, we've talked about, I think, previously some of the more popular ones.
Yeah.
So we can find this, well, for my part, I'll confine it to a couple of lesser known ones. One was Alternative Cars. It was run by a guy called Peter Philby. who's well known, I think, in the kit car scene, particularly for publishing magazines. And it was, just as the name says, it was about kit cars and other sort of lesser known cars, less popular cars. And, for example, one of the cars introduced to me was a car called the Matra Murena. I knew about the Bagheera, didn't know it had been replaced, and bought a copy of Alternative Cars one day with this nice-looking sports car on the cover and thought, blimey, I'm going to have one of those one day, and indeed I had. Indeed I did. I had several as it happened over the years. So I can blame Philby for spending a ridiculous amount of money on a hobby that, is great fun, but isn't exactly fruitful in other senses. But yeah, it was a great magazine. Particularly liked that one. He then went on later on to do one called Specialist Sports Car, which was in the same vein. I don't think it lasted too long, unfortunately, though. And there's another one, James, that you might remember. It's kind of a little bit before my time. Very 60s sounding magazine, Hot Car. In my cartoon brain, I imagine it was written by a bunch of guys who walked around the office wearing Afghan coats and calling each other man.
I think that was probably the case. In fact, I believe that Hot Car did evolve into Performance Car at some later point, but it was a fantastic magazine. It was certainly late 60s to up to the middle 70s, and it was. I'm just trying to think of the characters involved. I think there was somebody called Bostock in it who was in it most weeks and was the editor. But
if you stick with me, I'll tell you. I've got one handy.
Oh, really? Have you? Fantastic. And there was another chap who I can't remember because my mind's going. But it was a combination of. It did do the kit car scene as such, and it did performance cars. I remember them doing quite a big thing on Lotus at one point. But it was a slightly aspirational mag for the working man who wanted a faster car. They used to do a lot about beach buggies. I think that was the first time I saw beach buggies in one place about 1969. They really sort of plugged into that sort of zeitgeist, which was very popular in the UK for a few years for some absurd reasons, because there aren't that many beaches where you can drive your beach buggy on, really. But I can remember them having large features on those. And it was just a very good, interesting mag because, they had great pictures on it and features. And it was practical stuff as well, which you don't get in very many car magazines these days. They actually show you how to take things apart and put them back together again.
Absolutely. You were right. I've just picked up the magazine. This is from 1971, this one. Yeah. And it's edited by somebody called J. Anthony Bostock.
Yes, him, yeah.
And on the editorial page, I guess there's a picture of a couple of cars. There's a Marcos Mantis, a Rover P6 3500, and a beach buggy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of issues of it. I bought it just to do some research and things, and they ran tests and did features and again, unusual and interesting cars. And sometimes that's what I write about. So getting material on them can be a little bit tricky. So you got to go and look for old car magazines and sometimes quite obscure magazines. I mean, I don't think Hot Car was that obscure back in its heyday, but it's not very well known nowadays.
No, it isn't. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like Custom Car was a huge magazine, which may have had something to do with the centre spread on those. And they did have scantily clad ladies in it, which was another bonus of buying it. But it was 100,000, 200,000. It was absolutely massive. And oddly enough, I did actually go for a job on that in 1976. I wrote a letter, or was it 76 or 78? Because it must have been 78 because I had a driving license by then. And I did get an interview, but I couldn't go because I had an exam that day. So very stupidly, I took the exam and probably didn't do very well. Whereas what I could have done was gone to their offices, because they were part of IPC at the time, and that was a big office block on the south bank of the Thames. And I should have gone, but I remember writing quite a larky, because I just thought, they're never going to talk to me, and I think I sort of just took the rise a bit and built my part up a bit, because I was a cocky 18-year-old, and they wrote back and said, "Yeah, come and." It was probably because then I would have had to make the tea, I should think, rather than do anything interesting. But that's one thing that I passed over, and maybe I shouldn't. But Custom Car, listeners, was an absolutely huge magazine until I suppose the early 80s, and then that sort of thing about, making full populars, go with V8 engines sort of faded away, didn't
Yeah,
it
it did
somewhat?
really. I need the sort of max power generation as well. They've kind of faded away as well. You mentioned performance car.
Yeah.
Now, there were two incarnations of performance car. I think the original incarnation eventually more or less evolved into Evo, not maybe in terms of the magazine itself, but in terms of some of the staff. I think
Yeah,
people
it
on it
did. Yeah,
transitioned to Evo.
that's right. Yeah, I was in the version before that, and then obviously all the clever people got together and stayed on and said, "Let's start a new magazine, but we don't want Ruppert in it."
They were just jealous of you, James. Just jealous.
Well, strange enough, when I first wrote for Performance Car, because of the strange arrangements, I had to use a nom de plume, or even another name. I was called Eddie Riff. And for fans of music, there was a Phil Manzanera album called In Search of Eddie Riff. And so I got the name Eddie Riff from that. So actually, if you ever see any features written by Eddie Riff about used cars in Performance Car, that's me. But because I wasn't allowed to use my name because I wrote in other magazines. It did, as you say, there was the Clarkson era. And then there was the era when I was in it, and then after that, as you say, it got reinvented as Evo. And
but there was a second incarnation as well. It was revived.
Yes, it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, I can recall. I think it was Chris Knappman who was involved with that. A couple of other guys. Unfortunately, it was pretty obvious looking at it and reading it. It didn't quite have the funding that it once had. To be able to compete with Evo. It wasn't a bad magazine by any stretch of the imagination, I hasten to add. But obviously, if you're producing a glossy magazine, then you need to have a lot of advertisers, a lot of readers, preferably both, and a bit of moolah behind you. And too many magazines and too many fine magazines just haven't. That's right. That's the issue. It's, as you say, your custom car circulation, into six figures back in the day.
Yeah.
You will not get a magazine with six-figure circulations now. Indeed, many of them will be happy if they get into five-figure circulations.
Absolutely, I think they struggle to get there. But also, as you say, if you look at these old mags, I mean, the actual pleasure of reading them is actually the adverts. There are so many adverts, aren't there? I mean, you can spend as much joy looking at those.
Yeah.
The extras that you can get for your Mini, to extend their gear lever and do all sorts of things and add 23 gauges, which was a big thing in hot car and custom car at the time. You basically had to have the Concorde flight deck, didn't you? The cockpit in order to have a car that was any good.
Yeah, I mean, the ads in some of the old magazines are fantastic. If you're looking at even a car magazine from the 80s, shall we say, I'll grab a motor here. We're doing a bit of research, so I've got a few old magazines. Here's one from 83, and you open it up, and, some good editorial, but a lot of adverts all the way through it. About used cars, new cars. There's classifieds. This is the days before the internet. If you want to sell a car, if you were a dealer, you were selling, for example, say a Lancia Monte Carlo, you were maybe the Checkered Flag Garage and a few of those second-hand sitting around. You'd put a classified ad in back of motor or autocar listing what you had. And it was great, especially if you're a youngster reading that, crikey, how much they're selling that for? Wow. Might be able to afford one of those if I save up in a few years' time. And I think the joy of that's all gone now.
It has, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the internet has spoiled it completely. And in a way, it's a shame in that, it was quite fun deciphering the ads, never mind anything else. What did all the words mean? What did all the letters mean in order to enjoy it? But it was a wonderfully vibrant thing, the ad space in car magazines. But you need money to run one, as I've found out.
Indeed. So that's unfortunately where car magazines have gone and where they're going. That they are kind of dying on their feet to a very large degree simply because not enough people buy them, and in particular, not enough people pay to advertise in them. And we can blame that on two things. One is the internet, and two is the limited attention span of people, which is quite a serious issue for lots of reasons, but particularly when it comes to reading, for goodness sake, pick up a book, read it, educate yourself, you'll feel better for it. That's my rant for the day.
Yeah, I mean, buy our books is basically what we're saying here. That's the message we're trying to get over to people. It just encourages us to write more.
And on that Slightly self-serving note, we'll take another break. A new episode of Bangers and Classics is released every Thursday and it's available on YouTube, Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, and basically anywhere that'll have us. Move on to special editions, though. Now, we're not talking about the Escort Harrier here, really, but...
well, except I am.
Oh, he is, right.
I do.
Oh, God. So there you go. This is the level of organisation here. How nicely we dovetail. I'll say one thing and James will go the other way or vice versa.
Yeah.
That's what it keeps it real. Keeps it real. Right, Mr. Ruppert. Escort Harrier then. Named after a jump jet.
Well, absolutely. But I think, when it comes to special editions, very few cars are deserving of any special edition at all, really. And maybe it wasn't at the Morris Minor Million. There was a couple of hundred of those, and that was in 1960 something, very early 60s. Which was it was in a lilac colour as well, wasn't it? It was a special colour, and you had a special badge on it, and that's probably one of the earliest examples, or if not the earliest example of a special edition. I'm sure somebody can correct me on that, but it's very hard, isn't it, to justify a special edition? But you can have a go at trying to do that, David.
Well, okay. Probably not justify. I mean, justify is a strong word for some things, I think.
Well, enjoy, I suppose. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, there's some I like. Lotus Esprit Turbo, the Essex Turbo. The first run of Esprit Turbos were all Essex special editions. And I suppose maybe you can justify it on this basis. The reason why the first Esprits were all Essex Turbos and the Essex colour scheme were because the Essex, and I'm not talking about the county, I'm talking about a Monaco-based an oil conglomerate. They didn't actually refine oil or extract oil. I think they were oil brokers. But however, they sponsored the Lotus F1 team. So the first Esprit Turbos were all in the colours of Essex. They're quite attractive. The blue, silver and red, if you remember that, James.
I do, very much so.
Yeah, they do look good. It's quite a nice special edition in terms of looks. We've talked about this before, but with the VW Beetle Jeans edition, the UK only ever got one series of that. But there were several series in other parts of the world. They spun that one out for a bit longer elsewhere. Britain got it once, one batch, and that was your lot. That was okay. Denim seats, and quite funky for the early 70s. Cleo Williams, about it.
Yeah, that'll do, won't it?
It was uprated over the standard Clio 16 valve. You got the 2-litre version engine, and you got gold wheels. And Renault kept building more and more of them. I think the original owners weren't too happy. They were only going to build, 500 for Britain, and then they built a second batch, and then I think they built a third batch.
There was 3 batches, wasn't there?
Yeah, not too many survivors today, though. I don't think. Tinworm got them.
Absolutely.
Here's one you maybe like, James. Volkswagen Polo Harlequin.
Yeah, marvellous. A marvellous car to appraise, where you wouldn't know.
There's no hiding your enthusiasm for that.
But I think they sort of revived that the other day, because I did see a picture of a sort of a modern version of it, and but basically that's what people have been doing for many years to keep cars going. Actually, just stick another door or panel on it. And it doesn't matter what colour it is, so long as it's covered in paint. But
yeah, a bit like the In-Betweeners.
Absolutely, yeah, you could do that. But you do that with all sorts of cars. You could do that with a Citroen DS quite easily. Rover P6, wasn't it? It was quite easy to unbolt the panels and bolt fresh ones on. And I think that's the way people survived. But when you mentioned special edition to me, I sort of pined for the sort of 80s and 90s, I suppose, when there were so many wonderful ways of selling cars, and so I've got a fairly long collection of car books, the Glasses Guide, and also the Current Auto Prices Guide checkbooks, which are what car salesmen have to check that when you bring your car in for part exchange, it is what it says it is, because the book will tell you whether it is, as well as tell you where the VIN plate is. But it's just marvellous to look at it. I mean, it is like time travelling through a very different era. And the ways that manufacturers thought of geeing up a car so that it would sell in rather better numbers, especially when it was coming towards the end of its life in particular. And these books, cover like a 10-year period. So I just picked a 1994 one at random, and you just look at, the Vauxhall Nova. What a wonderful car that was. And it's just unbelievable. There was the. I'll just run through a few, which this will probably conjure up all sorts of, you'll say, I remember that one, so just stop me. But there was a Gem limited edition, a Spin, there was a Life, there was an On Tebes, there was a Club, there was a Diamond, there was a Star. All these are limited editions. There was a Sting, there was a Fling. I mean, you must have got a lot of money for thinking up what words you could have. There was
Bling.
a Solar. There was a Snap.
Wasn't it?
Yeah,
wasn't a Bling special edition?
No,
just
to
to rhyme with the other ones.
No, you're just messing about and not taking this at all seriously.
There
was a Snap. There was a Fun. There was an Expression. There was a Pearl. There was a Sport. Oh, it's just unbelievable, isn't it? There was just so many of these things, and and really all it was wheel trims. Maybe a better cassette player, in some cases a glass sunroof and some tinted windows. But some of these ran for about a year, so they were either terrible sellers, and in one case I think there was 2 years, and it was either very popular or it was very, very sticky. It's a bit like the Diamond limited edition. It wasn't very limited at all, and it ran from January 88 to July 1990.
What about the Club?
The Club, well, it depends. There's 19 April 87. They had a Nova 1.2 Club limited edition, based on the Merit, but you had a colour keyed grille in white and bumpers and door mirrors. Yeah, colour keying, that was the thing. Flush wheel covers, none of those other fancy ones. Yellow grey body stripes, Club decals, tinted glass, and low profile tyres.
What about the seats? Does it mention those?
Seats, it doesn't actually. It says yellow stroke grey trim. It sounds as though you're slightly familiar with this. This may have been your company car at the time.
No, it wasn't that. I passed my driving test on one.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cost new, it was £5,630. So you're in a very expensive Group 4 insurance car.
All right. It was bloody awful, pardon my language.
Yeah.
It wasn't terribly exciting to drive. Having said that, I did drive one for a magazine a few years ago and actually enjoyed it. It improved with age. I think that's maybe the way of putting it, best way of putting it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Nova special editions.
Nova special editions. There may even be a book in it for us, David, at some point.
Good God, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, apparently they couldn't call it the Nova in Spain.
Is that why it ended up as the Corsa?
Yep. It apparently means no go. It doesn't work.
Yeah. No.
Nova.
Oh, right.
So, yeah, someone told me that. I don't know if it's true. No doubt someone will correct us amongst the listeners. God knows somebody has to
keep us right. Yeah, to keep us on the straight and narrow and keep us out of prison, because they're the ones keeping an eye on us. But really, it is just I just lament the dealer special edition, really, because they've all gone. Really, they sort of do it a tiny bit, but not very much, because cars sort of basically have everything. And in the old days, a heater was, some sort of luxury item up until relatively recently.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to this 10th podcast. All being well, it'll be an 11th one. But until then, thank you very much and take care.
Yeah, thank you for listening.